we are in the magnificent courtyard of the magnificent Louvre, the world's beloved art museum. In fact, the most visited museum in the entire world, with more than 7 million visitors in 2022, the most recent year of data. Well, it is a beloved place, but it's also a location of profound importance for history, including for modern history. This place goes back nearly 1,000 years because this location was an early fortress for French kings already at the end of the 1100s and in the early 1200s. By the Renaissance times, it became the location for the palace of the French kings. And these parts of these courtyards were built already in the 1500s. This became the place of residence for a number of French kings until Louis XIV, the Sun King, who was born in 1638, lived through the early years of unrest during his youth. The Fronde decided to move his capital and his court out of Paris, perhaps for safety, also to expand, to create the palace at Versailles. This remained a major center, though, where the kings kept their art. And that collection was already a collection of magnificence given the power and the conquests of the French kings. The court remained mostly at Versailles, but Versailles and the Louvre became completely intertwined in the early years of the French Revolution, because in 1789, when the Estates General were called so that Louis XVI could win some tax increases in order to pay for the debts that France had taken on during its support for the American War of Independence, the revolution got underway. And in the revolution, the demands for constitutional rule accelerated. Not only that, the protests against the monarchy accelerated as well, including when Versailles was stormed by a large group that were demanding justice from the king, and it was decided by Louis XVI and his security that he should return to Paris. And in fact, the family returned to Paris, to this place, actually just a bit outside to the Palace of the Tuileries, which was the residential site for the kings in this grand complex. And Louis XVI and his wife Marie Antoinette returned to this place towards the end of 1789. The revolution continued to become more and more radicalized, and in 1791, the king thought it was probably prudent to leave Paris. War seemed to be about to break out with the neighbors of the Habsburg Empire and Prussia, and King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette slipped out of town in disguise, went to Varennes, where they were recognized, recaptured, and brought back here to their great misfortune in 1792, because then they were sentenced to death by an increasingly revolutionary government, and in 1793, in the Place de la Revolution, now the Place de la Concorde, from revolution to Concorde. They were beheaded by guillotine in January 1793. So this is the site where the revolution reached this dramatic moment, and it gives us an opportunity to reflect on what was the meaning of that tremendous change, which in fact changed the world in fundamental ways. Where did this revolution come from? Of course, an event of such momentous significance doesn't have any single source. It is a confluence of many events, some very deep and some very much temporal to that moment, to that context. When we think about the specific events that led to the French Revolution, as in so many times of history, it was a protest over money that was the most immediate moment of the revolution. The king was looking for taxes to pay off the public debt. And when governments start to appeal for taxes, there's naturally opposition, but there's also more clarity about the inequalities within the society. Because when the king called for more taxes, what became evident was the inequality of the burdens of the economy of the time of 1789. France politically was organized in the so-called three estates. The first estate was the church, the clergy, the priests as individual, the church as major owners of lands across the kingdom. The second estate was the nobility. The nobility, of course, by definition meant large landowners with many prerogatives and privileges, including tax exemptions. So when the call for more taxes came, there was the nobility saying, excuse me, we have our tax exemptions. And the third estate was the people, the commoners. The commoners meant in practice, because of the very limited rights of political representation, the what we might call the upper middle classes in our society, not the desperate and the poor who had no political voice, but the professionals and the merchants in the urban areas. Now, the political structure was that the king, who was an absolute monarch, needed to still call for the advice and the consent he learned of the three estates in the Estates General, which was called into session in 1789. And these three estates were organized not exactly on one man, one vote, or one person, one vote, but by the relative power of the three estates. So the clergy and the nobility were far less than 10% of the population, but they each had 1/3 of the power of the Estates General. And the commoners, so-called, who were representing the middle class of society, had 1/3 of the power. This meant that 2/3 of the power lay with the privileged, with the clergy and with the nobility, and the broader population, not really representative of the whole population by any means, but representative of the rising middle class, the rising urban populations, was almost automatically outvoted by the clergy and the nobility. So when the Estates General was called and the question of taxation was called, this raised a more fundamental question. our society is unequal. It's riven by privilege. It's riven by exemptions, tax exemptions, by huge inequalities of wealth and income, and therefore political power. So the Third Estate broke away, said we will not be outvoted by the First and the Second Estates. A small number from the First Estate joined this breakaway, which declared itself the National Assembly, a term used to this day. But that was 1/3 of the original political structure. And the National Assembly embarked on revolutionary change. And that really is the essence of what became the French Revolution. Already in 1789, the new National Assembly called for a new constitution of the state. And at the core of that new constitution was a vital document, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, one of the most important documents in modern history, because this document said essentially that all people in the society would have equal civil rights, equal rights before the law. Not still equal political representation, because women were not part of that deal, nor were the landless and those without wealth. But the revolutionary call was for equal civil rights in a new civil society. And that was a transformative moment. And based on those ideas, the National Assembly proceeded with a series of truly revolutionary enactments, ending the privileges of the church and the clergy, ending the remaining feudal privileges of the nobility, stripping the nobility of its distinctive legal rights in front of the law, and creating the basis of what would be a constitutional monarchy. Of course, events accelerated from that point, and the revolution accelerated through dizzying spiral of events. The return of Louis XVI and his Queen Marie Antoinette, the calls for the turn to a republic, the regicide, the beheading of Louis XVI and Queen Marie Antoinette, the massing for war and the beginning of the Revolutionary Wars as the National Assembly declared war on Prussia and Austria, the radicalization of the National Assembly, where the moderates found themselves thrown against the wall by the more radical elements, and then the establishment of a reign of terror when a committee for the public safety was established under Robespierre, and what was unleashed was a bloodbath in this society from 1793 to 1795. The Reign of Terror was followed by another period of political upheaval led by the Directors, or the Directorate period, which lasted until a rising military figure came and made his coup on the 18th of Brumaire in the revolutionary calendar, and Napoleon became the first consul of what would soon become Napoleon's empire. So the revolution politically had a radical and dizzying and unpredictable political course. Now, these were the contextual events, but there were, of course, deeper events and most fundamentally the ideas of the time that infused this revolution. Where did this call for equality of rights, for a government based on representation, the idea of Republican government, arise? And for that, we must think about the prevailing ideas of a new secular rationality, what we call the Age of Enlightenment.